well, there were like 6 boxes that you had to check when you were filling out just the initial adoption application. And one of them said, have you ever been a victim of sexual abuse? And I was terrified to check that box because my answer was yes.
Welcome to the Blind Mom Life podcast. I'm your host, Chelsey Painter Davis, blind wife, mother, and public speaker. I want to invite you to dive deep with my special guests and I as we talk conquering disabilities, cherishing motherhood, and choosing life. Are you ready? Action. Hey. Another week, another movie, and we are talking Annie. Oh, this is such a classic from my childhood. I remember watching it all the time with my little sister, Katie. It's such a fun, hopeful, inspiring, awesome story. And I have to say, there's been like 1,000 versions of this film, but my favorite forever and always is the version with Carol Burnett, Tim Curry, and Bernadette Peters. When they start singing Easy Street together, oh my goodness, it is wildly entertaining. I have this secret dream, though, that one day I will be asked to play the horrible Mrs. Hannigan as the manager of the orphanage. But I don't know. She's pretty scary on her own, so a blind Mrs. Hannigan might be absolutely terrifying, and it might be a little too much for this whimsical, hopeful musical. But who knows? Maybe one day that will happen for me. For those of you who have never seen this film, it follows the story of a little orphan girl named Annie growing up in America in the Great Depression. She's haunted by the loss of her parents, but hangs on to the hope in the promise they made that they would one day come back for her. Years later, she's invited to spend a week at a millionaire's mansion. And oh my goodness, what a sweet place this millionaire has. It is so exciting to see Annie running around at this just magical place that is so much better than the orphanage she's currently growing up in. But it's not all glitz and glamour. Annie and her host, Oliver Warbucks, butt heads pretty hard in those first days or hours that Annie is in his mansion. But they end up bonding over this shared grief that they have, that their lives didn't go exactly the way that they're supposed to. They both have trauma. Even the millionaire has pain in his story. And they realized through this journey that although they're different, although Oliver's a bit rough around the edges and Annie's a bit wild, they're better together. So I want to share a story with you, my new friend Adi, of how adopting her daughters brought up a lot of trauma, not just for her daughters, but for her as well. But I think it's fair to say that Adi saw, just like Oliver did, they're better together.
Thank you so much, Adi, for coming on to the podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself for everybody?
Thank you, Chelsey, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Well, my name's Adi Tilford, and I am a writer, a speaker. I'm a Jesus-led, trauma-informed educator, and I serve at my church as a lay leader. Sometimes I get to preach at my church in Grand Junction, Colorado. And I have a podcast that is called 8,000 Promises. And I am hopefully going to write and publish a book at some point, maybe several. That's a hope and dream, but it's all a little bit new in this creative, doing my education in the field of glorifying God in a really public way, I guess.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, I'm married to Sam, and we've been married for, 2006. So It's going to be 18 years.
Oh, that's
this
amazing.
it,
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yes, we have two girls who came home by adoption, both of them. Nella is 12 and Mia is 10. And we have two labs who are definitely part of our family, and two ferrets who are
Oh my
also part
goodness.
of our family.
Oh, wow. How did you meet your husband?
Oh my goodness, that story is sort of funny. I worked in Glenwood Springs, which is a real big tourist town. I grew up very close to that in Western Colorado, and I would come home for college. Come home from college, and I worked as a server, and I actually worked as a cave tour guide.
Oh, that sounds
Also,
really cool.
it was really, really fun. It was a great college like summer job, you know?
Mhm.
And I actually took my husband's twin brother on a tour through the caves, and he had his girlfriend with him, but it was very rare that there were like cute boys on tours, you know? And so I was so nervous. I remember being like so nervous because I'm so cheesy. And especially when you're a tour guide, you're real cheesy.
Mhm.
So I just remember like having that moment. And then I ended up getting hired at this restaurant that's very popular. And Sam's twin brother, Bruce, was working there.
Mhm.
And so we became friends. He had a girlfriend, and we became friends. And one day he was like, "Hey, I want you to come and meet this guy." So I went to this table with four guys at it, and the guy had this huge beard. It was like this big burly mountain man beard,
Yeah.
and Bruce, his twin brother, said, "Who does that guy look like?" And I was like, "I don't know." He asked me like so many times, "Who do you think he looks like?" And I always was like, "I don't know." And then he's like, "It's my twin brother." And so that was our first meeting. And
That's
then we ended
funny.
up hanging out. Yeah, that summer. I always feel like it was probably a really good thing that I didn't think they looked just alike. And yeah, so Sam and I just ended up hanging out that whole summer. And then I went back to college. He actually was in a relationship. And that next summer I came home, he and his girlfriend had broken up, and he kept asking me to hang out, and I'd be like, "I don't want to date anybody. I'm moving to Philadelphia. I have a life. I don't want to date anybody." And he kept asking me to watch movies, and I'd be like, "Okay."
It's not
Like that
dating,
wasn't
it's just
dating,
movie watching.
apparently. So we joke. And then he moved to Philly for that next, I guess he moved for about half a year
Oh,
with
wow.
my girlfriends. Yeah. So, and then I moved back to Colorado after that.
Oh
So
my goodness. So
it's
what
crazy.
when did you guys decide that you wanted to like settle down, start trying to have a family? What was that conversation like?
Oh, so we dated for 3 years before we got married. And then I think 2 years into being married, because, yeah, I was like 27. I don't know. We're like, oh, everybody, it's time to have kids.
Mhm.
And so I think we were actually at his brother's wedding, and we were like, okay, it's time. I don't
Is it the
know. We
twin
didn't.
brothers wedding?
Yeah. Yeah. In Hawaii. And we were just like, okay, it's time. Let's have a family.
Mhm.
That wasn't, I mean, I don't feel like it was anything really profound. It was just sort of like, oh, it's time now. We've been married for 2 years. Like, that's
Yeah.
such a really long time.
So what did that look like? What did that look
um,
like for you guys? Because you said you had two daughters through adoption. So
right.
how did you get to that process?
Well, after about a year of, trying in all the fun ways you try to build your family intentionally,
Mhm.
I wasn't pregnant. I had not had any like positive pregnancy tests, nothing, no missed periods, nothing that was, even like, oh, hey, maybe. And for sure there was like this, why hasn't that happened? Okay, I know that it can take a year. And I went to see it ended up being a nurse practitioner, and she said to me something that's really hard for anyone who's trying to get pregnant and uh, not getting pregnant. She said, well, stop stressing about it and it'll
Oh,
happen.
oh my goodness.
um yeah, which is just, if you if you have friends that are struggling with infertility, whether it's even been 3 months, like it doesn't even matter how long, the last thing they need to hear is telling them that it's stress causing them to not get pregnant. Um, Whether that is related or not, that's like just not the way to present that
Mhm.
information. So I kind of like, and I already had a natural tendency to like take a lot of things on myself, blame myself. I had a lot of unresolved shame, and I had a lot of unresolved trauma still at that point that I didn't even know how to deal with. So that message to me was like, this is all my fault.
Oh, no.
And so I got more stressed out. I got more intense. I started doing all the temperature taking and ovulation tests. And, I had sort of a sense inside, maybe like a gut feeling that something wasn't quite right. So I think maybe 6 more months where we were like, intensively like following the signs
Mhm.
that it would be, this is the time to try. I think that's when Sam and I started to just to like be like, okay, we really need to maybe look into this. So we found a fertility doctor through a friend who I knew one friend who had secondary fertility, which is when you can't get pregnant a second time. But
Oh,
honestly, in my life, everybody was getting pregnant. So I didn't know anybody else who was struggling with not getting pregnant,
that's
which
really
is interesting.
isolating.
Yeah. And now I know so many people who even were in that time, similar timing, having trouble, but I just didn't then. I didn't know anybody. So I felt super isolated. I felt lonely. I felt like it was my fault. And I think what happened was we had some friends get pregnant and announce it at a party. And I had a terrible reaction. Like, it's embarrassing. Like, I just was so jealous and
Mhm.
so angry. And I sort of like, I said things that were not kind. It was just not like great
Sorry.
behavior. Yeah. And I
That's hard.
remember that's kind of when we were like, we need to go get help. So we started in a fertility doctor journey,
Mhm.
went through like all the testing, and like there were not like tons of like really significant things. I think they found that my eggs sometimes were not fully developing. So I started taking, I don't know, some drug that like makes sure you ovulate and all of that. We tried artificial insemination, like just with, the doctor helping get the sperm to the right spot.
Right.
And and we just didn't ever have success with a pregnancy. There was never a pregnancy. And I would say in January of 2011, that's when that's when we were like, okay, let's go talk to an adoption agency. So there was like a lot of adoption in my circle. My best friend from college, she was adopted, and my best friend growing up, she was adopted. And I had, even before when we even got married, we had talked like, oh, adoption would be really cool. We just thought it would happen like in a
Mhm.
different order. And so I actually had a lot of fear, like who would ever like want, a teacher and a construction worker? Like we don't make a lot of money. Who are we that somebody would want us to adopt a baby or something? And when we went and met with an agency, and they just said, that's not what this is about. And I think Sam and I both felt better. So then we sort of gave ourselves a date. It was January. We said, if we're not pregnant by June, um, we're going to change gears. And I love this because my daughter's conception date was in January of that year. And I just
Oh,
remember
wow.
um, like the feeling of the feeling that adoption was the way, more and more and more throughout that year. Like I couldn't shake it. I have goosebumps like talking about it. But yeah, I just could not shake that was how we were going to build our family. Even though I was still really sad about not getting pregnant, there was like a shift in my heart. So
Mhm. Was that a Was that a slow shift starting in January, or had you already had your heart being softened to it at that point? But I don't. I'm sorry to phrase it like that. I don't mean like that there was something wrong with you for being upset about struggling with fertility. That's heartbreaking and stuff. I just, how did that shift go? Was it slow to being open to pursuing adoption like that, or did it really ramp
Okay.
up in that 6 months?
I think that 6 months was really integral in like a big shift, but maybe more so for my husband than for me.
Mhm.
I, when I really am reflective, I think it was even before that that I felt a real pull toward adoption as the way to grow our family. I didn't understand it though. I didn't understand adoption and all the complexities the way I do now, but I definitely felt drawn toward that. And also, there was a little box that, well, there were like 6 boxes that you had to check when
Mhm.
you were filling out just the initial adoption application. And one of them said, have you ever been a victim of sexual abuse? And I was terrified to check that box because my answer was yes. And I didn't know what it meant that I would have, like, I didn't understand why I needed to share that to be a mom. And I think it, or to be considered to be a mom. And I think it just triggered for me so much of my trauma was about the inability to speak about what had happened to me, or there was just a lot of healing that hadn't been done yet
Mhm.
around that. And I even remember when we were just in the midst of trying to get pregnant, like crying out to God, like, I want to be a mom, God, but I think what I want more than anything is healing for this, I don't know, this woundedness that I have. And so I remember, I just remember walking in the desert with God and being like, if I was being real with anybody in my life, I would have to say the deepest longing of my heart is actually healing for this. I didn't know to call it trauma at that point, but for this trauma from my childhood that I haven't worked through with anybody the way I kind of knew I needed to work through, but I just hadn't done that.
Mhm.
So I think there was a, a push or an opening of my heart or a softening of my heart earlier, but it was really like after meeting with that agency in January where I feel like that's where God started to be like, it's going to be okay that you tell your story. Like there was something in that timing too.
Mhm.
And there was incredible healing through that process of being honest about the harm done to me and the struggles that I had had because of that. And I think it really set me up for the journey of parenthood, where all of those struggles often get brought back into light through different scenarios and circumstances along
Mhm.
the way.
So, walk us through the logistics of checking yes on that box. I'm sure a lot of other moms who might be listening to this could have that same fear, like, oh, I want to adopt, but I can't fill out that form. I'm too scared, and rightly so. I feel like that makes sense. Why was it relevant to the adoption process? Without
Mm.
sharing anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. Why did they need to know that? What you say it had triggers later. What did you need to be equipped for?
Yeah. Well, oh, that's such a good question, Chelsea. I feel like this answer is probably 7 hours long.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Well,
no. So I'm gonna just like,
that's why you're writing all the books, right?
that's right. That is a lot of what my writing is about. Okay, so as a starting point,
Mhm.
adoption in and of itself is a response to trauma because however a child comes home through adoption, there has been traumatic stuff taking place in that child's life. So whether that is for a woman facing an unexpected pregnancy and choosing to place her child into a family, that choice is not made without really complicated
Mhm.
situations happening in that woman's life. And so even a fetus is experiencing all of that chaos or trauma or difficulty or stress, or just even that like stress of making a choice that's that significant, of like filled with loss and grief for the
Yeah.
woman, then the actual separation of a child from their first family is incredibly traumatic. Like, we are designed by our creator to be connected to our biological parents. And so when that connection is severed
Mm-hmm.
through adoption, well, adoption is part of that, right? Because
Right.
someone is feeling like they can't take care of a child in the way they want to, or because someone is told by the state that they're not allowed to take care of their children any longer because they don't have the skills or tools, or they're facing really tough mental health or addiction, all
Right.
of those things, right? So the child is fully impacted by that. So there's just like anytime a child comes home by adoption, there is a layer, at least one layer, and usually several, of traumatic events
Mm-hmm.
that impact that child's development, brain development, physiological, body development, emotional development. I would argue spiritual development. It's going to affect attachment wounding, is going to affect all of those parts of a person.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. If you as an adult have these unresolved wounds, these maybe they come from different things. So in my journey, I've learned that I have some attachment wounding that stems from the death of my sister.
Oh,
She,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm
me
sorry to
too.
hear
It's
your loss, 80.
Yeah, me too. And it actually happened when I was in the womb with, so I was with my mom when my
Mm-hmm.
sister died. But that's been a lot of my learning. I didn't even, at the time we were adopting, I didn't even put together how much that part of my story would actually help me understand the journey of my children, but also other children who've experienced really hard losses, other people who have gone through really tough things, and just how God knit me together, even through that tragedy, to make me like who I am. And so I've had to work through the things that are challenging about that,
Mm-hmm.
but also I've started to learn how to embrace and love the beautiful things that have come from that, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So that was one layer that I hadn't really put together, but I knew that the sexual abuse was something that was really traumatic for me.
Mm-hmm. Of
I
course.
had done I had done a tiny little bit of counseling on it early in college, but very little. I know I had spent tons of time with God talking about it, crying about it, but I was so scared to really get the help that I needed. And so I think that the checking of the box was actually like one of the greatest gifts from God to me.
Mm-hmm.
Just say, like, an opportunity to actually face truth. Like, so much of the fear was unfounded. It was, so much of the fear was developed in shame and just things that God does not believe about me. And yeah, so that was like a starting point of the work. So adoption agencies, or quality adoption agencies, should be walking with parents, potential parents, and doing the work that is needed so that your work gets resolved, your inner workings get resolved
Mm-hmm.
before you are placed in the responsible position of caring for a child who has a lot of wounding.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so I think that Sam and I met a couple who had actually been turned away by the adoption agency we felt most like we were supposed to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the reason they were turned away was because they were just encouraged to do counseling before they moved forward, and they weren't really open to that at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam and I both felt like if that's what if that's what they think we need, maybe that is like really good, and we'll know that. And I think this is funny. I've never really talked about this, but I'm like, I think I actually needed somebody to help guide me in that.
in
because I
the healing process for the
yeah,
sexual
like
abuse?
right, like, you
Mhm.
could benefit from counseling. I think I needed someone to say that to me.
Like, to
Like,
give
I
you
could
permission almost to get
yeah,
help? I think I get that.
yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's because those things happened when I was little. I didn't tell anyone, who could have done that work with me until much later,
Right.
and so I missed that developmental place of having someone, like, really encourage it, and it was almost like this journey was God's way of helping grow me into a person who benefited from, I don't know, the healing work that counseling can provide.
That's
So,
awesome. What kinda
yeah.
resources, did the adoption agency try to set you on the path for? Was it, like, individual counseling for you, couples counseling for the both of you? What kind of, adv I guess, pieces of help could another mom who's listening grab onto if that's her similar story?
Sure. So I but the actually with the agency itself, they had us write our biographies. And so Sam and I both agreed we were going to be totally truthful. Um I think at the to the point where I could have been then, I think now my biography might look a little different. I don't know,
Mhm.
but at that point just like really being honest and being open to the need for counseling. So just that process in and of itself, writing my story and like in the raw for one person. So this was to the caseworker with
Mhm.
the agency. And then we met and talked about it. And then we had all these other surveys. So I think in and of itself, just that process was super healing at that moment. The
Yeah.
agency felt like we were like in a good place, that we would seek help if we need. I think they spoke that truth over us. Like, we know that you will seek help when you need help.
Mhm.
I think that was huge. And I think that work that we did was really significant in that time.
Mhm.
Um, but then, gosh, when our daughter was like 13 months old, I was having really, now I could say it was PTSD, but I didn't really know that that's what it was. I was having these moments of like, I don't know, flashback, but I was having, it was like postpartum with like severe anxiety. I didn't realize that that was like postpartum related. Adoptive moms can also endure postpartum depression and anxiety, even though we don't have all the like physiological changes in the same way as someone giving birth.
Mhm.
There's just, I don't know, I guess just the whole change of your life. And,
Yeah, the new
you know,
stressful environment, the sleep
yeah,
deprivation.
sleep deprivation, all of it.
So much changes.
Yeah, and I was having these, like it was, like, really, really deep fear that someone was gonna hurt my baby, not, like, somebody else. Like, I wasn't in a place where it was the intrusive thoughts weren't that I was going to, the intrusive
Uh-huh.
thoughts were that other people were, and it was, like, people I shouldn't have necessarily been, like, worried about. And there was a moment I had a really huge trigger happen at I was called to jury duty. It was just, like,
Okay.
a wild thing. And I remember sitting in my car just like totally out of sorts. Thankfully, I was by myself, right? My kiddo was with someone else. And I just remember being like, this is it. Like, this is where I need to be asking for help. I needed help a while ago, but like I don't want to live like this. And this isn't like, if this kind of thing happens when I'm in charge of my kiddo, that's not good. So that's when I reached back out to my agency for some suggestions on counselors.
Mhm.
I think the coolest part for me in that was that they knew it was super important that I found someone who had training specifically with sexual abuse. So if someone listening does have that as part of her story, which the likelihood is, it's very likely, right?
Yeah, it's very unfortunately, it's very common, the heartbreaking thing about
Yes.
that.
Yes. So they were able to help me. Like, I think they just sent me the Psychology Today, like, listing of counselors, which you can look up on Psychology Today, put in the where you live and find somebody. And then I was able, there were only two choices in my community. I live in a really small community.
Mhm.
I think now we're so lucky because like there's so many available resources online. Um, at that time, right in
Yeah.
2012, that wasn't the case. So I found somebody to start working with on my story then. And so that was good. We also were really encouraged to get parenting help. And so
What does
when
parenting help mean? Is that like parenting
yeah,
classes?
sure. Yeah, like I was super open and looking for like mom and me classes where they're helping teach me about development and um my own wounding, my own trauma history. Actually, one of the big I guess consequences of having some of that happen was that I didn't have a lot of confidence. And I do think that is a struggle for so many moms, just that
Mhm,
confidence piece. But one of the things I kept learning in a lot of the books I was reading around adoption and attachment and was just the really important piece for moms to believe that they have the skills they need to do the job that they are being asked to do as a parent,
mhm,
and the bigger thing was that they just said I think this was our very first meeting with the person who founded the adoption agency we used. She said, your child's wounds will bump into your own. And so you need to have the resources, you need to know about the resources that will help you as you enter, a journey that is maybe unexpected.
mhm.
And I think, when you're brand new and you're like, that's not going to be me, that's not going to be me. But the reality was it was us. And we were able to find a really incredible attachment, competent therapist. And we actually started thinking, oh, we'll have this therapist help us by like, doing play therapy with our kiddo or whatever. And in the end, she ended up being a parent coach
Mhm,
for my husband and I, because so much of what was needed was a shift in how we parented, or even just like an understanding of how to parent a child who has deep attachment wounds and a trauma history.
mhm.
And then what's happened is that we're like, oh, well, we both also have attachment wounds and a trauma history. And oh, maybe we actually can benefit from this help ourselves. So um, our our parent coach actually turned into a therapist for both of us along the way.
Can you speak a little bit on the logistics of how the adoption process works in bringing a baby home? It is, I mean, I've looked at it a little bit. It sounds so overwhelming and intimidating. Like, there's lots of options. You could do international adoption, domestic adoption, foster care in the hopes of adoption. And how do you navigate that big, what it feels like a giant ship called adoption?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to suggest just agree. I think this is a really good starting place. I'm going to show it's a book
Hmm.
that just came out. It's called Adoption Unfiltered. I actually interview the three authors on my podcast. Their episode is has already been released. It was in March of 24. So if people are interested in learning a little bit more, I really recommend a book like this. It's written by an adoptee, a birth mom, and an adoptive mom. They each have a section of the book, and they've each like brought in the voices of several other adoptees, birth parents, and adoptive parents. The adoptees are representative of all the different avenues of adoption that you mentioned. I'm pretty sure that the adoptee voice is kind of representative of that. When we were first starting out, I don't think we did all the due diligence that I would hope people are doing now. Um, I don't think we knew that there was a lot to learn and think about. I had been a teacher for 10 years. And so I actually felt a lot of guilt for not um, adopting through foster care because I knew there were so many children that needed families. And in the end, we really wanted to experience what it was like to raise a child from a baby.
Hmm.
I don't I didn't at the time think about the fact that still, even then, a child has the entire genetic heritage of their first family, and that they also carry, the stories that they experienced in the womb and in those first days of separation and weeks and
Yeah.
months of separation. So that part, I think we kind of were like, oh, let's go this route because we'll get to be parents of a baby, and we really
I
wanted
think
that.
that's a very natural thing for a family to want to do, especially one that struggled with infertility and doesn't already have children that they've raised from babies. I feel like that's a really,
Yeah.
I mean, a kind of fair, a very reasonable desire to want to have. But that makes a lot of sense that you mentioned it. Like, it's not like this baby just poofed into existence. This baby has a story too, even if they enter
Mhm.
your family at a very young age.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I hope people hear that because I think that is a misconception. Even that um, sometimes, agencies working from an unethical place, or lawyers, or people who are maybe not in it for the right reasons to help children find families, but to help families find children. They might be presenting that information really differently. And I mean, I think child brokering is a term that has been brought up for some of the really unethical practices found in infant adoption.
Hmm.
That's why I highly recommend this book. This book specifically is a lot about infant adoption and just how critical it is, both for a woman who's facing an unexpected pregnancy, that she understands that the names that pop up first on the internet are the people that are paying the very most money for marketing. And that's not necessarily an unbiased or helpful place to start if you're considering adoption as one of your pathways. And then for families, like, our job to make sure that we are not participating in child trafficking,
Yeah.
like, it's a big, big deal. There are so many families wanting infants,
Hmm.
and so few infants that are being placed into families with integrity and ethics in
Hmm.
place. It's really something that we have to, especially as believers, we have to be doing our due diligence. I feel like we were lucky, but also, like, one of the things that drew us to the agency we used was that they really, we were told that their training was really thoughtful, and they've just continued to do that kind of ethical training and helping us understand, like, the role and purpose of who the adoptive parent is, and that just because you decide you want to adopt doesn't mean you actually will get to, because it's really up to the expecting parent who decides to make an adoption plan to
Hmm.
choose the family for that baby. um,
What
and
is the
they
name of
really
the Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, what is the name of the agency that you use?
uh,
Because it seems like you had a really good experience.
Yes, we still love them, and they are now doing foster care, and they do international, like, homes. So they will, like, help with home studies for international adoptions, but the way they're involved with orphan care internationally is that they help provide financial support and training for homes in that country, and, like, make sure that children are being able to stay in their country of origin. Which, I think, if someone's considering international adoption, that's something to really do a lot of thought and learning about. Why is it better for a child to end up in a different country? Are there other options for children so that they can keep their culture and their heritage and be taken care of? There has been a ton of human trafficking violations with international adoption. So, really doing your due diligence. Children, if they have families in their home country, like, it can just, I feel like there's that, like, a white saviorism, American saviorism, where it's like, hey, we're just going to bring these kids to this better place, instead of knowing that they might have a good life in their home country if they just had the right resources
Mhm.
provided, you
That makes
know?
sense. I think it can come from a really good place, but you're right, it can also come from a really uninformed place if we're not looking at the whole picture of what's best for a child.
Yeah. And I mean, there are needs all across the board, even with, like, our foster care system. I think we could say the same things. Like, all of these systems are run by humans, so there are going to be flaws. There are going to be places of vulnerability where somebody with power, seeking power and money, would take advantage of that vulnerability. So as the adoptive parent who has a lot of the power and a lot of the resources that go into this, we have to do the best job we can, making sure that we are only providing a home for a child that really needs that home, and not that somebody's just being taken advantage of so that we can have a child, because that,
Yeah.
that baby grows up into a grown-up human, and we have to be able to have every conversation with our child from, the time they're 2 till the time that they're, well, I guess even earlier than that, but till the time that they're 60,
That makes
and
a
we
lot.
have to, yeah, I think
Would
so too.
would you say so I feel like a lot of the times when the subject of infertility in families comes up, just adopt is thrown
Mm.
around maybe a little too easily and in a way that can come across as very callously. Do you feel like adoption has been a healing process for you and your husband, or is it really just not that simply put?
So, yeah, I have a lot of resistance to just adopt. I feel like, I want there always to be a choice of life for a child. Um, and I think that, like I said earlier, we are each designed to be in connection with our biological family. Like, there's even just things about getting to grow up with people who look like you that are really like about helping you become whole in your identity. And so there's just a lot of complexity for a child who is part of a family by adoption.
Hmm.
They face a lot of really difficult internal world things, of just, maybe it's like of not looking like your family, or maybe it's issues of abandonment or rejection, because that experience feels like that to so many adoptees. Whether, we can use language that's really about, about that care and placement and finding a home, for a child, but they still are going to have to work through those places that feel severed and broken. And yeah, there's like a real need to wrap mental health care around children who experience, adoption, because we're talking about this being in the most vulnerable developmental stages of the child's life.
Hmm.
The brain is still developing, the body is developing, the mind, emotions are developing. And so you need to, like, have a lot of learning around what that looks like. You need to do your own work so that you have space for your child's experiences. Um, I think just recently, one big revelation for me, that's I have to give a sermon on this topic of anger, but one of the things for me is that I've just had a lot of anger from my own wounded areas and places. And as God has done this incredible work in me, oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Oh my goodness. Okay, they're going down. Sorry. So as God has done this incredible work in me and helping me learn how to forgive, how to release that anger, how to surrender some of that stuff I wish I could control over to God.
Mhm.
One of my kiddos has said to me, has started to share with me about her own anger, her own journey with anger. And I guess the timing is not lost on me, that as I have created some space in my own heart and being, I'm not carrying so much of my own anger. There's space for her, or both of my kiddos,
Mhm.
to share their own journeys with anger. You know,
Yeah.
like, okay, thanks God. Like, we need to have space for our kids' feelings. And So yeah, it's not a just anything with adoption. There's going to be a lot of work, I think that my friends in Adoption Unfiltered, they talk about the mantra like love is enough. But when you really look at like 1 Corinthians 13 and you look at what love actually is, endurance and patience and self-control and just so many really hard things to actually do and live, then you think like there's nothing just about just adopt.
Mm-hmm. Do you still struggle with feelings of loss or grief with the infertility, even though you've moved on into a new chapter of your life? Is that still hard when you look back on it?
Um, so I know that it is for a lot of people. That is like an ongoing journey. I have lots of friends who have shared that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my grief comes up well, okay. I mean, I think this is tied to it. I think my grief comes up in some of those moments where I'm like, I wish I could have been in control of how this particular part of life went for the kiddo I'm raising or something. You know, like that's where it comes up. Because I just love, I don't know, I can't imagine my life any differently. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm so thankful to have the kids I have. And also, I think it's a both and. Like, also, I'm so sad that they've had to go through what they've had to go through. You know, like if
Yeah.
I could um, do that differently for them, I would want that different for them. So I guess sometimes I think that's where a lot of my grieving comes up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool with like not having a kid that looks like me. I'm cool with some of the other like parts. Maybe the grief and loss comes up with this way I had originally reached out to you, of just like feeling people who don't have this kind of story, like, oh, is it so much like maybe that comparison or that grass is greener? You think maybe, oh, they don't have these hard things or this
Yeah.
struggle.
It's
And I
easy to
do.
compare.
Yeah. So maybe those are the times when that's probably grief and loss coming up
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what your family looks like now?
Well, we're in a good season, which is really cool. My girls are in late elementary school and one just started middle school. And we've done a lot of beautiful work. I think one of the things I like to talk about is just being a therapeutic parent or friend, or which I'm like good at sometimes and struggle with other times. But I think like we like being together. There's space to talk about the really hard parts of adoption. Um, I hope my girls feel like that, you know, and I think my husband and I, this is something when we've been through some really tough seasons where the needs of either me because of my own traumatic history and like how some of that's been ruptured in our journey, or like the needs of kiddos have been big, or even maybe Sam's needs, like as he's like started a new business because of work stuff. I think he and I have like the strain has been felt on our marriage,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so I think that right now, he and I have become really aware in the last 2 years that we have got to do some important marriage work. Um, you know, when families go through hard things, marriages suffer and they can end. And I get it. I get why it can be something that is tough to keep working through and working out. So I guess that's maybe where I would say like, hey, we're keeping on working on ourselves and on our marriage so that our kids have a really safe landing space as they are starting to enter identity development, which I think can be a really tricky time for adoptees, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us Oh, before I ask you more questions about your podcast, what advice do you have for other women who are struggling with infertility or considering adoption? If you could give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think, well, one piece. I think I know.
That's
I'm
the
like,
hard part.
I know. I think honestly, the number one thing you need to do is your own grief work, your own processing. So, whether that is with a pastor or a spiritual director or a counselor or even your spouse, or, I think it's really, really important that you start by understanding your own story, how infertility is impacting those earlier things that have happened in your life. Or even just like how infertility is impacting you in this moment, and like what your grief and loss is around what's happening. Because the more you do that, then the more space you'll have for walking with children who will come into your home having experienced their own grief and loss. So, yeah.
Okay, now tell us all about your podcast. I know you have an upcoming forgiveness series that would fit really well into everything that we just talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. So, actually, I think when this comes out, it'll be like almost toward the end of the forgiveness series. So, that's what I talk with these ladies about from Adoption Unfiltered. We talk about just the need to grieve and be aware of all the loss in adoption. And like we kind of talk about, one of the ways to forgiveness is through grief and processing loss,
Mhm.
which was, I think that's just like such a powerful episode. Yeah. So this is my third year podcasting, and I kind of started it with like the intention of, building a platform, but it's ended up becoming the thing I love most. I just love hearing stories, and I love hearing about redemptive work and just seeing that even in a broken and hurting world, there's so much hope, there's so much beauty, there's so much joy that can be found. And so I guess I'm trying right now to create a space that feels like a safe space to be authentic about the story that you have, and to be reflective and to make meaning from it, and to see how transformation can come about when we really are open to learning from and through each other, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
So, yeah.
Where is the best place for people to find you and your work?
So I have a website, aditilford.com, and I am on Instagram. Mostly I do most of my posts on Instagram, and then they go to Facebook, but mostly Instagram at Adi Tilford Writes. And then my podcast is 8,000 Promises. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. I do have several guests who are from the adoption world or foster care world. So that's something, if you're interested in hearing adults talk about their journey, there are several adult adoptees represented in my guest lists over the last 2.5 years. Because I would say that would be my second piece of advice to someone thinking about adoption,
Mm-hmm.
is to listen to adult adoptee stories. And I feel like sometimes it's really hard to listen to, and sometimes it's so encouraging to listen to an adult adoptee. But truly, they're the ones who have experienced what it's like to lose a first family and
Yeah.
be brought up by a different family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so
So,
much for sharing your story. I'm so glad that you have been put on this road to healing from trauma, but at the same time, I'm
thanks.
very sorry that it ever had to happen in the first place.
That's it, Chelsey. That's the thing, right? Like,
Mhm.
it sucks that we have to go through hard things. And also, it's like an opportunity when we're in healing or get to that point where we can say, like, we can offer hope to someone else. Um, I'm grateful that I've moved into that space a little bit more.
Yeah. What is what's the most meaningful thing that you've been able to help with, would you say, so far in
Mm.
sharing your story and building a podcast platform and wanting to write, have you been able to have like one crystallized moment when you're like, whoa, this is what I helped with? Or was that really just your daughters?
I mean, I know like that's been such a big part, is just the work in my home.
Mm-hmm.
I think there have just been some moments with like one person where somebody shares with me, like maybe I'm the first person they've shared something with because I created a space. And this is not on the podcast, but like because of that work, somebody in my life is like, hey, I need help. And so like being able to actually help connect women or men, but connect someone with a resource that's going to help them on their healing journey, that I guess I just remember how hard that first step was. So I guess getting to be the part of someone else's first step has been a real joy and a gift, and I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you so much, Adi, for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate your story.
Thank you so much, Chelsey. It was such an honor to be here.
We all have trauma and we all have pain. Whether we're a 2-day-old baby who's just been given up for adoption or a fully grown adult woman making her way in the world, we all have things in our past that we need to heal from, that we need to process, and we need to overcome so we can live our life to the fullest in a way that honors God and is truthful with our stories. Time for Ask Me Anything. So the first question I have for you today is, did you receive millions of dollars in lawsuit damages after going blind? No. I did not receive a single dime. I didn't even get an apology from the birth control company, my primary care physician, my neuro-ophthalmologist, the hospital I was seeking care at. No one said anything. No one wanted to take responsibility. And that's really frustrating now when I look back, because pseudotumor cerebri does not typically result in someone being as blinded as badly as I was. It's not a thing. It's usually caught way before. The treatments are usually much more successful, but that didn't happen with me. And although I do think I have a small amount of responsibility in it, because I did not advocate for myself. I didn't give enough pushback. I didn't seek second opinions. I just went with what my doctor says. And part of that's my fault, but that's also their fault. I trusted them and I thought I was doing what they thought I should do. And I thought that that would take care of me, but it didn't. The other reason I didn't ever sue is I was busy going blind. I didn't have a lot of time or emotional bandwidth to go sit in a lawyer's office and explain exactly what had happened to me, because I was still suffering from it. I was still in so much emotional pain. I wasn't ready to do that. And by the time I was ready to talk about it publicly and share what had happened to me, the lawsuit window had already expired. So to this day, I've received no money and no apology, and I likely never will. The next question I have for you is, how do you get stains out of t-shirts if you are a blind person? If you know, please tell me. Right now, all I know to do is every once in a while lay out all my shirts for my husband and say, please spot spray all the stains. The other trick is if I'm washing something like bed sheets, because like my kids got Cheeto dust on them, I will bleach them. I love bleach. It solves that problem. It just cleans the whole thing. But yes, stains are a struggle for me. I tend to have at-home shirts, and those are just the t-shirts I know are riddled with stains because my baby has spit up on them and it's been a year and I still haven't replaced or bought new t-shirts, or I spilled dinner on them, or I washed dishes wearing the shirts. Those are just my work shirts, and I work from home as a stay-at-home mom. So I don't know the best way for a blind person to get stains out of shirts. Like, if you live alone as a blind person or your spouse is also blind and you have tips for this, you should be telling me, because I want to know your secret magical ways. Please inform me. If If you want to see more content from me, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, or you can check out my website, chelseapainterdavis.com. That is a great place to sign up for my newsletter or to check on my upcoming events. Do you want to see me in person? The next place I will be sharing my testimony is All Things New, a fundraiser for the Life Choice Pregnancy Center in Winter Haven on Friday, April 12th. I would love to see you there. Thank you so much for hanging around through the end of the episode. I hope today that we have shown you that all life is worth living. Just like in the book of Esther, where God paints a beautiful portrait from the background, God is painting a beautiful portrait with your life, and we can learn so much from each other if we only share our stories. Whenever it feels like the darkness is pressing in, just remember the words of Jesus Christ in John chapter 9. As long as I am in the world, I am the light. Let me try again. Brr, brr, ah, blah.